A pair of Church's Oxfords costs £450, hand-stitched, English-made, built to last a lifetime. But here's what Church's won't tell you. 40 minutes away, the same Goodyear welt machines are making the same shoe for £180. Less than half the price. Same county, same leather, same construction. 7 British shoe brands on the high street get dismissed as the cheap ones. Built to a standard that should embarrass labels charging 4 times more. Let's fix that. Here's something that will annoy you slightly and then make you rather pleased with yourself. For the better part of 2 centuries, the finest shoes in the world weren't made in a boutique on a smart London street. They were made in Northamptonshire, a modest, unglamorous stretch of the English Midlands that happened to sit on the right kind of clay, near the right kind of cattle. Close enough to London to ship finished goods, but far enough away that nobody thought to charge London prices. By the 1850s, Northampton alone was producing more shoes than the rest of England combined. Not fashion shoes. Working shoes, army boots, and, eventually, the kind of formal leather footwear that would go on to define what a proper British shoe was supposed to look like. The towns around it, Kettering, Rushden, Desborough, Earls Barton, each specialised. Each had its own factories, its own families, its own quiet reputations that never really left the county. What's changed since then isn't the shoemaking, it's the marketing. Somewhere in the last few decades, a handful of those Northamptonshire names moved their flagship stores to Jermyn Street, hired photographers who understood soft lighting, and started charging accordingly. The shoes got better packaging. They did not, in most cases, get meaningfully better leather. Meanwhile, the brands that stayed exactly where they were, in the same factories, on the same machinery, run by the same families, kept their prices honest simply because nobody told them not to. That's the gap we're exploiting today. Before we start, you need 3 things to judge a shoe properly, and none of them require an expert. First, turn the shoe over. If you can see a visible ridge of stitching running around the edge of the sole, that's a Goodyear welt. It means the sole is stitched to the upper through a strip of leather, not glued. A welted shoe can be resoled indefinitely. Properly cared for, it will outlive you. A glued or cemented sole cannot be resoled at all. Once it's worn through, the shoe is finished. This single detail is the difference between a shoe that's an investment and a shoe that's a rental. Second, smell it. Genuine full-grain leather has a particular smell. Slightly sweet, slightly animal, unmistakable once you know it. Bonded leather or heavily corrected leather smells faintly of nothing, or worse, faintly of plastic. Your nose is a more reliable instrument than you'd think. Third, bend it. A quality leather sole will flex at the ball of the foot and spring back. A cheap sole either won't flex at all, or it'll crease and stay creased. That crease is a fault line. It's where the shoe will eventually give up. Every brand on this list passes all 3 tests at a fraction of the price you'd expect to pay for it. 7 brands. Let's begin. Every British man has an opinion about Clarks, and that opinion was almost certainly formed at the age of 11, in a school shoe shop, with a foot measuring device clamped around his ankle. Here's what most men never revisit. Clarks was founded in Street, Somerset, in 1825 by 2 Quaker brothers, Cyrus and James Clark, who began by making slippers from sheepskin offcuts. Nearly 200 years later, the company is still family connected, still headquartered in the same small Somerset town. And still, this is the part that gets missed, producing formal leather footwear built to genuinely serious specifications, sold at prices that assume you've never noticed. The Clarks Unbrand collection, sitting quietly in the men's formal section, uses full-grain leather uppers and a construction that borrows directly from traditional shoemaking principles. A cushioned, flexible sole unit bonded to a properly built upper at prices beginning around £70 to £90. Compare that to a fashion house Chelsea boot in comparable leather at £280, and the gap has nothing to do with the cow the leather came from. Where Clarks becomes genuinely interesting is the desert boot, a shoe so unassuming it barely registers as a design classic, despite being exactly that. Introduced in 1950 by Nathan Clark, based on rough suede boots he'd seen off-duty officers wearing in the Western Desert during the war, it has been in continuous production for over 70 years without ever needing to change. Suede upper, crepe rubber sole, 2 eyelets. It retails at roughly £90. It has been in the permanent collection of the Design Museum. Prada has produced its own version at 4 times the price, and it is, structurally, the same shoe with a different name stitched inside. The thing to understand about Clarks is that the brand suffers from an image problem entirely of its own making. Decades of school shoes have left an association in the British mind that the tailoring and formal ranges have quietly outgrown. Walk past the school shoe wall, go straight to the men's formal leather section. That's where the value's been hiding the whole time. We open with this one, so let's give it its due. Loake was founded in 1880 by 3 brothers, John, Thomas and William Loake, in an outbuilding behind a house in Kettering. By 1894, they'd built a proper factory on Wood Street, and that is, remarkably, where the company still makes its premium shoes today. Same town, same site. 5th generation of the same family now running it. A Goodyear welted Loake, the proper kind, made in that Kettering factory, not the lower tier lines produced elsewhere. Takes around 8 weeks to complete, uses roughly 75 separate components, and passes through some 200 individual operations before it's finished. That is not a figure of speech. That is the literal manufacturing process, largely unchanged since the Edwardian era, because nobody has ever found a faster way to make a shoe properly. The Loake 1 range, their standard collection, not the top-tier 1880 line, retails between £150 and £200 for a full Goodyear welted Oxford or Derby in calf leather. That price includes a sole that can be professionally replaced 2, 3, sometimes 4 times over the shoe's life. Compare it to Church's, which uses a broadly comparable construction process and sits at £400 to £500 for an equivalent shoe. Compare it to Crockett & Jones, similarly built, similarly priced above £400. The leather is not noticeably worse, the stitching density is not noticeably worse. What you're paying the extra £200 to £300 for, at the premium end, is a name that's been more successfully marketed to people who've never turned a shoe over to check the sole. Loake shoes are worn, if you go looking, by a genuinely surprising number of professionals who could afford anything they liked and have simply decided the maths doesn't add up the other way. They buy 2 pairs of Loakes a year, resole them when they need it, and never think about the subject again. That is, in essence, the entire old money attitude to footwear in a single sentence. If Loake is the Northamptonshire brand that started to get noticed, Barker is the one that's actively worked to avoid it. Founded in 1880 in Earl's Barton, smaller and quieter even than Kettering, a village rather than a town, Barker has spent nearly a century and a half building a reputation almost entirely by word of mouth among people who already knew what they were looking for. There has never been a significant marketing budget. There has, by most accounts, barely been a marketing department. What there has been is consistent Goodyear welt construction, full-grain leather uppers sourced predominantly from European tanneries, and a house style that leans slightly heavier and more traditionally English than some of its competitors. A broader last, a more substantial sole, the kind of shoe that looks built rather than styled. A standard Barker Oxford in black calf retails around £220 to £260, noticeably more than Loake's standard line, noticeably less than the Jermyn Street houses, and arguably closer in weight and construction to the £450 bracket than the price tag suggests. The company also runs a factory shop and periodic outlet sales where end-of-line and slight second pairs, a shade of leather that didn't quite match the batch, a last that's being retired, drop to £120 or lower. The imperfection, in the overwhelming majority of cases, is invisible once the shoe is on the foot and has had its first polish. Barker also happens to make one of the best regarded country boots produced in England. The kind of chunky, triple welted, weather-sealed boot designed for a Saturday spent doing something outdoors that involves mud, dogs and possibly a shotgun. At around £280, it competes directly against boots from more fashionable outdoor brands, charging £450 for construction. That is, in most respects, less serious. Barker has never needed to be famous. It only ever needed to be right, and it has been right, uninterrupted, since 1880. This is the one that surprises people, because it doesn't come with a Victorian founding date and a family portrait on the wall. Base London is a relatively modern operation, and it occupies a slightly different lane to the other names on this list. It doesn't manufacture in Northamptonshire, and it doesn't claim to. What it does is design genuinely well-constructed leather footwear, source proper full grain and nubuck leathers, and price the finished product for men who want something that looks considerably more expensive than it is, without the pedigree tax. A base London leather Chelsea boot or brogue typically retails between £50 and £90. At that price, most competitors are using bonded or corrected grain leather with a cemented sole. Base London's core formal and casual ranges use full grain leather uppers with a construction that, while not always full Goodyear welt, frequently uses a Blake stitch, a different but genuinely durable method that allows for a slimmer, more modern silhouette while still permitting resoling. Unlike a fully cemented shoe, the brand has quietly become the shoe of choice for a certain kind of young professional who's worked out that a £400 designer boot and an £80 base London boot will, after 18 months of regular wear, look almost indistinguishable, provided both are polished occasionally and neither is left to dry out next to a radiator. Where base London earns its place on this list specifically is the sheer range at the lower price bracket. You can build a genuinely presentable rotation: a black Oxford, a brown derby, a Chelsea boot, a smart casual loafer, for under £300 total, in leather that will hold up to daily wear for several years, which is roughly the cost of a single pair from most of the brands people assume they should be buying instead. Before we move to the next two, if this video is saving you money, do us a favour and hit that like button now. Subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss what we cover next, and drop a comment below. Tell us which British brand you've quietly relied on for years, the one nobody else seems to rate. We read every single one. Right. Grenson. Founded in 1866 in Rushden, Northamptonshire, by William Green, Grenson holds a claim that very few shoemakers can genuinely make. It's widely credited with bringing the Goodyear welting machine to England in the first place, and with popularising the brogue as a piece of formal footwear rather than a rugged Irish country shoe. Before Grenson, brogues were something you wore to walk across a bog. After Grenson, they were something you wore into a boardroom. The company has changed hands a few times over the decades and now sits under slightly more contemporary ownership, which has done something rather clever. It's kept the traditional Goodyear welted formal range running in the original Rushden factory, while also producing a lower tier, still leather, still well-constructed range that brings the entry price down considerably. The traditional Grenson line, full Goodyear welt, Rushden made, calf leather, sits around £280 to £320, genuinely comparable in construction to shoes charging £500 and above. But it's the secondary Archie and core casual ranges that belong on this list. These use a lighter, Blake-stitched or cemented construction, depending on the model, full-grain leather uppers, and prices beginning around £150 for a boot, £130 for a formal shoe. What makes Grenson worth specifically hunting for is the outlet arm. The company runs periodic factory sales and an online outlet section where past season colours and slight seconds, the kind of blemish that requires you to be told about it before you'd notice, sell at 40 to 50% off. A £280 Goodyear welted brogue in a colourway from 2 seasons ago that nobody but a shoe obsessive would identify as dated regularly appears at £150. Grenson invented half of what people think of as a classic English shoe. It has never stopped being one of the best places to actually buy one. Cheaney sits slightly apart from the rest of this list because, on paper, it isn't cheap. But stay with us because the maths here is genuinely remarkable. Founded in Desborough, Northamptonshire, in 1886 by Joseph Cheaney, the company has spent well over a century producing some of the heaviest, most traditionally constructed Goodyear welted shoes in England. Thick leather soles, substantial lasts, the kind of shoe that a certain type of countryman has been quietly loyal to for generations without ever mentioning the brand name out loud, because mentioning it rather spoils the point. A full-priced Cheaney sits at £350 to £420, genuinely in the same bracket as Church's and Crockett & Jones, and by most independent assessments, built to an equal or superior standard. This is where it would normally fall off a cheap brands list entirely. Except Cheaney runs one of the most generous factory outlet operations of any English shoemaker. Their seconds, shoes with a cosmetic flaw too minor to notice without being told, a slightly uneven line of stitching on the welt, a leather grain that didn't quite match across both shoes in the pair, sell through their outlet at 50 to 60% off. A £400 pair regularly appears at £160 to £180. Sample sales, held periodically at the Desborough factory itself, have been known to bring prices down further still. The men who know this queue, literally, outside a factory in a small Northamptonshire town twice a year, because they've worked out that a £400 shoe at £170 is not a discount. It's a correction. It's the price the shoe should have been all along, before the brand discovered what Jermyn Street was willing to pay. The last one on this list requires a slightly different explanation, because Herring isn't a manufacturer in the traditional sense. It's something arguably cleverer. Herring Shoes was founded in the 1980s by a former shoe industry executive who understood something the big heritage brands didn't want widely known. Several of the very same Northamptonshire factories making shoes for the famous names were also willing to produce shoes under a private label, to an identical specification, for a fraction of the retail markup. Herring commissions its shoes from established English factories, several of the same ones supplying the bigger names on this list, using full Goodyear welt construction, calf and grain leathers, and traditional lasts. Because Herring doesn't carry the overhead of flagship stores on expensive streets, and because it isn't paying for decades of magazine advertising, it can sell a genuinely comparable shoe at £200 to £250, where the equivalent shoe, under a more recognised name, would be £400 or more. The company has built its reputation almost entirely on this arbitrage quietly over 4 decades, serving a customer base that tends to be older, better informed, and considerably less interested in what the box says than in what's inside it. Herring's own literature is refreshingly blunt about where its shoes are made and what they're built from. A level of specificity that, as we've said before on this channel, tends to be the first sign that a company isn't hiding anything. Buy from Herring during one of their sale periods and a full Goodyear welted English Oxford, made in the same county, on comparable machinery, to a comparable specification as a £450 shoe, can be had for well under £200. We began with 2 Oxfords and a gap of £270 that had nothing to do with the leather. 7 brands later, the pattern holds. Northamptonshire and Somerset built the reputation that half the shoe industry still trades on, and the brands that never left those factories, never moved to Jermyn Street, never hired the photographer, never put the price up simply because they'd noticed nobody was checking, are still there, making the same shoes, to the same standard, at prices that assume you'll never find out. Clark's for the everyday leather shoe nobody credits properly. Loake for the Goodyear welted formal shoe at half the going rate. Barker for the quiet Northamptonshire name that never bothered to get famous. Base London for the modern wardrobe built without the pedigree tax. Grenson for the brand that invented the brogue and still makes it properly. Cheaney for premium construction at outlet confidence. And Herring for cutting out the middleman entirely and simply telling you where the shoe was actually made. The men who wear these brands don't announce it. They resole the same pair for a decade rather than replace them when the fashion turns. They queue at a factory outlet. In a village most people couldn't find on a map. They were never buying a name. They were buying leather that does its job on a sole that can be replaced for as long as they choose to keep it. That was always the entire idea of a good shoe. Somewhere along the way, quite a lot of very expensive brands managed to make everyone forget it. If this video changed how you'll look at the next shoe shop you walk past, or better still, saved you a few £100s you were about to spend on a name rather than a shoe, hit subscribe and tap that notification bell. We cover British craftsmanship, British style, and the sort of old money common sense that takes generations to build and about 20 minutes to pass on. Drop a comment and tell us which brand on this list surprised you, or which one you've been quietly loyal to for years without anyone else knowing. We'd genuinely like to hear it. The next video's already waiting for you. We'll see you there.